Dr. Anna Powers, welcome to the Tick Bootcamp podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be here and thank you for having me.
Yeah, we're blessed to have you. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to spend some time with us and our listeners. So, Dr. Powers, why don't you first share with our listeners the name of your center and where your office is physically located?
So we are located in Roswell, Georgia. It's Longevity Health Center, and it's one of the longest standing, continuously running naturopathic clinics in Georgia. It's been over 45 years. Wasn't obviously started by me, but our founder was Seneca Anderson.
Oh, cool.
Mhm.
So, I was gonna say, there's no way it could have been started by you. You only look like you're 45. So how could you have been working for 45 years like you
Yeah.
were? You came out of the womb and you started treating patients. So,
Exactly.
talk to us about your background. Where did you grow up? And what were your visions for your future when you were a childhood? Meaning, what do you think you were going to be doing to serve the world early on in your life before you began your professional education?
Well, that's a great question. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and my grandfather was a diabetic. And as a child, like I remember even at 4 years old, I would give him his injections. And by 8, I was able to measure the insulin. So I think I demonstrated a propensity in the healing arts at a young age. Um, I did have, I'm a wounded healer, so to speak, and I've had my own healing journey. So honestly, I really couldn't vision a future. I don't think I had the capacity as a child. I had rheumatic fever at 4, and at age 8, I had an MMR vaccine and was unable to walk a day later. Um, that obviously all of those things have recovered, but I didn't really start to get a sense of my purpose until I was in my early 20s. And when I graduated from college, I happened to move into an apartment that was right next door to a health food store. And so it was the easiest place to grocery shop and get meals prepared. So when I would sit in there, I'd hear the owner walk by, like people would grab him, like, I have a cold, what should I do? And he'd go to these jars and pull out, slippery elm and licorice and all these things and tell you to stew it in some water and drink it an hour later. And I thought they were crazy. And then one time I got sick and I went and he gave me some potion and I made it and I felt better. And so that introduced me to the path of natural health. And because of the history that I had, the medical model really had not helped me with chronic headaches and GI issues and all kinds of things. And so that led me to meet a naturopath who was helped me with my health.
All
So
right. So you had this healing spirit, and even as a little kid, you weren't grossed out by needles or those kinds of things. That even as an old man, I like as you're describing, I was 8 years old. I was able to take out the needle, and I was able to. I was like, "Ugh." So you clearly were not squeamish in the way that most people were, even as a small child.
yeah,
And you had this heart for trying to help your grandfather who was dealing with a chronic illness.
yes,
You went through some of your own challenges, and the allopathic system did not work for you.
mhm,
I do want to talk a little bit about that and why you think in many cases that doesn't work for folks. And then you were brought to a place where you saw other people benefiting from a different system, a different
mhm,
medical system, different types of medical frameworks. You yourself and I don't believe in coincidences. I don't think there are such things. You yourself are
yeah,
now brought into this path where you're sick, you get better, and you see a contrast between what had failed you during most of your life and now what had been successful despite it looking like it was some woo-woo stuff. And that sends you on your path to becoming a naturopathic doctor.
yes.
So talk to us about, give us a little more detail on the kinds of contact you had with the allopathic community, and why you think that system of medicine was failing you in giving you what you specifically needed.
Well, let's see. With rheumatic fever, I was put on antibiotics to take every day, And I did so for 15 years, very religiously.
15 years?
Mhm. Yeah, so that obviously surprised that I developed GI issues, right? And when I would go, they would never ask what I was eating. Even back then, they didn't even check for food allergies. Eventually, they did. The only thing that showed up was turkey, and I mean, all kinds of things. Like I had headaches. I was given like narcotics, Furanil, as an 8-year-old, and um, I was I went to GI doctors, and even I had joint pain, like my shins hurt. Now I know why. Um, and joint pain, and I took a ton of aspirin to help with that. That was 8, 9, 10, 11, and I nobody was ever, everyone would just say it was growing pains. And I was like, no, looking back, I'm like, don't you think it's weird that a kid's saying their joints hurt all the time? Um, just nobody ever really asked why. I never felt better. I was just given things to help the symptoms. I ended up in the ER several times with GI issues after traveling to Peru. And then even as I'm just trying to think of there's so many things, it's kind of a blur. Um, but I spent a lot of time at the doctor's office, and I would say even like my senior year in high school, I missed like 30 days of school. I had to do a lot of overtime work to be able to graduate. So definitely, I wasn't getting better, right? And then when I did meet the naturopath, I I was just intrigued. Like everyone that after I was working with her, they were like, "Hey, you look different. What are you doing?" And I would tell them about her. And then I ended up hosting her down. I went to Atlanta to see her, and I ended up bringing her down to see all my friends and family because they were so inspired by the changes that they saw in me. So I think, you were asking about my experience with the allopathic world, and it's half my life ago now, and it's kind of fuzzy and blurry in a way. But I can say, I was on those antibiotics plus all the chronic sinus infections and bronchitis and you name it. I think part of all of those illnesses was also, growing up in Savannah, like it's humid and we worship old things. And so the musty smell was normal for me. I didn't really realize how impactful mold was until I became a naturopath. So I think that was impacting my health as well. But since I have been accountable for my own health and well-being, I've only had to take antibiotics twice. So in the first 25 years or 26 years, like a monthly to at least every 6-month experience to now the second 26 years or 20, whatever it is, 25, I haven't. I've experienced a much greater level of health and well-being and vitality.
Okay. So you jumped two different points with me.
Yeah.
We were walking to the point where you came in contact with the fellow at the health food store, and now
Yeah.
we got to a naturopathic doctor. So I'm gonna have to build that out with you so we can get more detail on that. So you did share with us you had about 25 years of various health issues,
Mhm.
and generally, when I'm interviewing folks on this podcast, they believe that they've gotten a better experience when they've worked with a naturopathic doctor rather than an allopathic doctor
Mhm.
for two reasons. Seem to be two sets of patterns that folks have developed for us when we've done these interviews, and we're 500 interviews in at this point.
Yes.
The first challenge is when someone is chronically ill. The allopathic system is designed as an acute care system, not as a chronic care system. So when you have a chronic illness like Lyme disease or any other chronic illness, like your grandfather was chronically ill with diabetes, the training and the financial system, i.e., the insurance system, that is built around the allopathic medical system. Um, gives us great outcomes when we're acutely sick, but horrific outcomes when we are chronically sick. That's
Yeah.
one path. The second path that we generally see, or pattern we see from folks on this podcast, is that the traditional allopathic doctor is trained to look for one cause for one set of symptoms, one bug, one illness, and they're just looking for that bug and they're looking to kill that bug. And the naturopathic community is very different. They ask a different set of questions, which is, what is the terrain that is now, a part of the person who is coming before me? And how do we get to the root cause? Meaning, how is the symptom a signal to us about what we should be looking at in the terrain, as opposed to looking for the bug that we're supposed to kill, or looking for the one cause we're supposed to kill? So those are generally the two paths that we hear argued to us in this allopathic naturopathic debate. So give me your perspective, not as a doctor today. We're still in the early part of your life. We haven't gotten past that part of our story yet. Why were you failed by the allopathic community? Were you failed because you believe that you were chronically ill and they were not able to properly diagnose and treat you? Or do you believe that you had doctors who were trained with frameworks that were limiting their capacity to properly diagnose and treat you? Or was it both?
That's a great question.
Thank
And
you.
yeah, I think it's both. I don't think, I mean, I don't think of myself as someone who is chronically ill, but if you write it all down, I really was. And that it was mistreatment after mistreatment, and not listening and not really getting to the root of what was going on. And I'm so grateful for the medical system for acute care, and saves lives every day. And those 2 times I needed antibiotics, I really need them. And I've never been more grateful to take a prescription drug in my life. And thank God for them. And there's so much more to the human being. We're physical beings, as we were talking about earlier, and we're emotional beings and spiritual beings, and none of that is being addressed or heard or listened to in that model. And I feel like, as a naturopath, I look at all of it and look to see, there's a certain constitution or a certain way of being that when someone, well, going off on another little road, so we
No,
can
no,
talk about that
no,
later.
no.
Um,
Let's go where we go. Yeah, I mean, I don't want you. I don't want you to throttle yourself. I want to have the conversation, and I
yeah.
promise you, I'll bring you back to what we need to complete before we move forward in the this hero's journey outline.
Thank you. So I do feel like when people come to see me, and even myself on my journey, no one was really asking the questions of, well, how's life at home? And, how's your stress level? And how are you sleeping? And how much water do you drink? Maybe they would ask me when I was a patient, are you staying hydrated? And I was like, yes, 2 liters of Coke every day. It's like, and they're like, good job, way to go. So, there's just a lot of shortcomings with the current model, and even the model back there. Um, and part of my journey was, that if my bacteria in my gut were being decimated by antibiotics, and we have that gut brain access, then there's going to be I had anxiety, and I had other things that were not being addressed either. And the only solution were medications that don't address the problem. So it was just one thing after another of being done badly. Not because they didn't want to help, they just didn't have the tools to help.
Yeah,
So
so I can tell you, as someone who's done as many podcasts as I have, and has spent as much time thinking about and talking about antibiotics, I really have this sort of, I guess, crazy relationship in my mind with antibiotics. I think I think antibiotics are one of the greatest medical technologies that have ever been discovered.
Yes.
And I think millions, if not billions of lives have been saved as a result of antibiotics.
Yes.
And that excites me. On the other side of the coin, part of what I was hearing when I was, listening to the part of the story we were just talking about is that because you're on antibiotics so long, and because it was, so aggressively used as a technology that you probably didn't need, it almost sounds like you became chronically ill, not as a result of the various bugs you were picking up during the course of your life, but because of the long-term use of antibiotics, which had an impact on you physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And we're going to build that out together.
Yeah.
But it almost sounds like, it's like the theory of the inverted U, where
Mhm.
we're getting benefit, getting benefit, getting benefit. Then there's sort of no benefit, no harm, and then it falls off the cliff and we start getting hurt by what could be a fantastic technology if not overused.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't say it better myself.
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
So let's talk more about now this. You first had this experience where you're blessed to live in close proximity to a health food store, and you're starting to see a different set of technologies being used. Rather than using antibiotics and some of these traditional technologies, you're now starting to see some other technologies. And again, antibiotics are natural as well, but a different set of natural technologies are now being used, and you're starting to see a connection between the results that you're getting from the use of these natural tools as opposed to the results, well, either the results you were not getting or the bad results you were getting when you were using other technologies, right? So let's build that out a little bit and tell me how that now got you to the naturopathic doctor that you were treating with that seems to have made all the difference in at least your career choices.
Yeah, so I think by hanging out at the health food store, I ate better. I was eating fast food. I smoked cigarettes, like nothing I'm proud of, but that's just how I grew up. And I began to question those choices for the first time. And I I think, you know, Tony Robbins and others say you're the sum of the five people you spend the most time with. And so by hanging out there, I made friends there, and my lifestyle began to change dramatically by hanging out with people who were ahead of me on the health journey and had placed more value on their health. And I also ended up with a roommate who worked at the health food store. And so I learned all kinds of things there about eating healthy. And so I just had a different lifestyle because of it. And then I went with a friend to Atlanta, and we were at a party and I met the naturopath there, and I just had allergy testing done. And I had the scars, like it was probably 2 weeks later, but I still had I reacted so strongly to almost everything they tested me for that you could still see the scratches on my arms. And she looked at me, she's like, "What happened? Did you get in a argument with the rose bush?" And I was like, "No, just allergy testing." And she said, "Oh, I could have told you that in 5 minutes." I was like, my mind was just like, "What? Like, no, like, what does that even mean? Tell me that in 5 minutes." So I went home and then I called her because I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I scheduled an appointment and went back up and had an appointment with her. And she does something called electrodermal screening or bioenergetic assessment. Uh, and that is a way of measuring resonance. So, for example, with a traditional allergy test, they will scratch your skin, put the substance on it, and see how much, if any, you react to that substance. With bioenergetic testing, there's a circuit, and you are in that circuit, and then the substance is introduced to that circuit, and then we test to see does that substance increase your energy, decrease your energy, or is it neutral? So does it inflame you, tank you, or nothing? And so she did tell me what I was allergic to. And it didn't 100% agree, but I would say probably 80% agreed. And that just kind of had me hooked. I'm like, wow, I could have gotten all that information. And not only that, is she found things that were contributing to that. Surprise, surprise, I had candida. Imagine that after, 20 something years on antibiotics. And, just addressing that alone was just life changing. And I think there was some, she supported my gut with the glutamine and probiotics, like all these things I had never heard of or taken before. And my gut changed dramatically. The stomach aches I was having all the time decreased. My energy increased. My passion for life increased. It was life changing.
So one of the things we talk about here at Tick Boot Camp is the risk formula. That this is based on General Stanley McChrystal's book entitled Risk, and Dr. General McChrystal argues that your risk of a bad outcome, in our case, the risk of you getting Lyme disease, is formulaic, and that it's threat times vulnerability. And the example that he had given in the military arena is that you can reduce your risk of a bad outcome by either reducing the threat or reducing the vulnerability, right? So, for example, here in the Lyme disease world, you can get bitten by a tick, but if your terrain is healthy and your immune system is healthy, in most cases, it can manage the germs that are spit into you. As opposed to you can protect yourself by reducing your vulnerability, or in the alternative, you can reduce the threat by becoming more tick aware and understanding what steps you can take to prevent yourself from coming in contact with ticks, or finding the tick early on when it comes in contact with you so it won't be attached for a long period of time, or some other tools that you can use. So you can either reduce the risk or reduce the threat, and you can protect yourself from a bad outcome or the risk of a bad outcome. So let's talk about that from the standpoint of your journey, right? Where you're not living the lifestyle that you said you were proud of. And I don't like, I don't want you to judge yourself, and I certainly want you to think that I'm judging you. But it sounds like you were living a lifestyle where your vulnerability was high, right? Not only because you were in an allopathic system that was constantly flooding your system with antibiotics, and we know that that inverted U was impacting you physically, emotionally, and spiritually, in large part because your gut was destroyed. And you found the candida later on when you had a competent doctor to work with. But it sounds like there are a lot of other things that are going on between using nicotine and hydrating with the use of Coca-Cola and other types of things that were, I think, in totality, probably immunosuppressive, and making it likely that your immune system was not going to be robust enough to protect you from the bugs that you were naturally going to come in contact with as a person interacting with other human beings.
Yes, absolutely. I would add to that multiple adverse childhood events in that time. And as I know now, that those events can cause the fight or flight system to get stuck on, and also contribute to the risk, the vulnerability of it. And, all of those things I think combined certainly minimized my capacity to fight candida, or later I did have Lyme as well. And
I promise we'll get there.
yeah, no worries. I'm fine if we don't. But yes, I 100% agree with that. I've never heard it put that way, so thank you. And that's been my experience as personally, and also what I've seen with patients. I would also add the vulnerability piece is, so many people come to see me when they describe their story, they will say, I was fine until. And I heard even some of the people on your podcast, I was fine until the last one I was listening to, till I was taking care of the house, like rebuilding the house. There's these moments where we go through really stressful seasons of life that I think also increase the vulnerability, even if we're eating well or kind of taking care of ourselves the best we know. There's still that high level of stress also seems to be one of the things that enables, whether it's Lyme or parasites or whatever people are dealing with, that is the opportune time for them to strike.
I love what you described, and we're going to build it out together a little bit more, right? So I agree with you that I was describing the parts of terrain vulnerability that most people are comfortable with, and maybe in many cases pointing at themselves, which is, I really wasn't eating really well, and I really wasn't really sleeping really well, and I wasn't doing the kinds of things, and I wasn't hydrating the way that I should have, right? So we talked about, the eating and the smoking and the and hanging out with maybe 5 people who are not probably as healthy as you'd want people to be, who you're surrounding yourself with, using the Tony Robbins quote of being the product of the 5 people you spend most time with. But now we have another piece that you introduced, which I think is really powerful, which is part of our terrain is the way we are treating our body and how we're eating and sleeping. But part of our terrain is also our neural pathways, and the neural pathways that have developed either and certainly most of them have developed during the first 25 years of our lives, either because our brain is now protecting us from traumatic events that we've had to experience, or because our brain is interpreting different events, which may not objectively be traumatic events, but our brain is perceiving them as traumatic events. And now we have all these protective neural pathways that are built into our brain that may serve us when we're in a hostile environment, but are not serving us well generally. So we now have this neurological terrain that is not serving us well, and is putting us in a position where we are now more vulnerable, because we are spending more of our time, or most of our time, in the sympathetic expression of our nervous system, and therefore you had this dual vulnerability, where you were not physically in a good place because of all the antibiotics you were taking, so your gut was ruined. You were not in a good place because of how you were ingesting, your nutrition. And you also had a number of different traumatic events during the course of your life, or the way your brain perceived them to be traumatic events, and you were living your life in fight or flight. I mean, it just sounds like a totality of a terrain that is not going to be able to protect you from much.
Exactly. Yeah. You nailed it.
So let's now talk about the spiritual piece, right? So we did talk about us as physical beings, and you were in a very vulnerable place physically, because of the failures of the allopathic medical system, and because of maybe some cultural failures of the way you were raised, and the foods you were ingesting, and the things that you were smoking, and those kinds of things. And then there were some challenges with your emotions, because you were constantly in fight or flight, despite not really being in an environment where you were being threatened. Where were you spiritually, and how were you were you in tune to your spirit? Did you know about your spirit? Or were you just so wrapped up in the sympathetic expression of your nervous system that you didn't even have access to your spirit?
I'm not sure. So I had the little movie as you were asking those questions kind of float by in my brain. And that time after when I was unable to walk, I had 106 fever. And the way I described the way I was feeling to my mom was that I felt like Jesus nailed to the cross as a 8-year-old. So I think I had some spiritual connection at that time, but not, I wasn't, we did go to church, but I wasn't overly, um, overly connected at that time. And I I did begin to wake up to a new level of consciousness around 22, 23, meaning an awareness of connection to others. I'm very empathic, which is what I've discovered later in life is also part of that fight or flight. But there's also, I also believe it's a gift, and I do believe that I am divinely guided a lot. And I began to wake up to that and begin to have premonitions of things that were going to happen that happened, and having more just more connection to behind the veil, so you speak. And I've done a ton of continuing education at every level, as professionally and personal growth and all kinds of things. And one of them, if I could remember, I would give credit, but I don't remember where. But that, we have a physical birth when we're born, and we have a mental birth around puberty, and we have a spiritual birth around 22, 23. And that was, my experience as well. And from that point on, I had a very strong spiritual connection to God, and to be able to see when God was speaking to me. Like, it's like not directly speaking to me, but like sometimes someone will come in, a patient will come in, and just a word will come to mind, and I'll just like ask it in some way that will sound normal, try to anyway. And then they'll be like, why do you ask that? It will mean something to them. Or there's just, there's some, I feel divinely guided in that way. And whether it's, just being connected to them, or it's coming from above, well, my belief is it's coming from above. And nonetheless, to answer your question, is I began my spiritual journey in my early 20s.
So, and again, we're at this place where we're focusing on your physiological challenges. We're focusing on your emotional challenges. The reason I wanted to explore with you at this stage of our conversation, before we get you through your first working with your naturopath and how that was different, and then ultimately going to become a naturopath yourself. So you were defining spiritual as consciousness, as a way of connecting with everyone else. And I guess my question to you is, and the reason I was asking that question is, I don't believe that you can subconsciously connect to consciousness, to God, to infinite knowledge. I mean, a lot of people have different ways of describing this. As a Christian, I have a traditional way of describing this, but I don't believe you can connect to consciousness if you are stuck in the sympathetic expression of your nervous system. You're stuck on this plane, and because you're stuck on this plane, you don't have access to consciousness, right? So that's why I was exploring this as we were building out your physical and emotional pieces. Is because you are physically sick or unwell, because you are emotionally unwell. Even though you may have you may have gone through your spiritual birth. I'm just wondering how much of this intuition was coming to you the way it does now. How much did you have access to that at that time? Or when you were in that vulnerable state, were you also stuck on the earthly platform and therefore not able to connect with consciousness?
I think I would go in and out. So there were times where I could, and there were times when I couldn't, as in my 20s. And then as I began more of a conscious spiritual journey, it comes much more frequently and readily.
Right. So, but we go in and out of sympathetic versus parasympathetic. We go in and out of being healthy and being physically unhealthy, and we go and depending on what expression of our brain, I'll bring that down to the organ. We are going to be able to be spiritually healthy or not spiritually healthy.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, I'm asking your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that would be my experience and thought as well. That the healthier I mean, I hesitate to say it because I see so many patients who are unhealthy, and yet it's their faith that has kept them going and has kept them, their faith in God and their prayer, that has guided them and kept them moving forward, searching for answers. So I,
I can't wait to
yeah,
I can't wait till we get to that part because I really
okay,
want to explore that with you. That's really exciting. But let's stay with you first. I do want to come back to
okay,
that. I promise. I do want to come back to that. But stay with you first. I want to know what your experiences were, right? Because one of the things that we've already sort of begun to foreshadow for the folks who are listening to this podcast is we offline we talked about human beings as physical, emotional, and spiritual beings. We talked about your physical journey, emotional journey, and spiritual journey. We talked about how you were failed by the allopathic medical system. In fact, it may have caused you to become chronically ill, quite frankly, which added to your physical unwellness. Um, and then you had a different experience. I think some of that was certainly divinely guided. We are supposed to go through challenges so that we can find our purpose. We're supposed to change physically, emotionally, and spiritually to become the people who are then capable of accepting the purpose and the mission that God sends us on. So we have to, we are adaptive beings, and how we change is through stress. So I appreciate you having to go through all of that to become who
me too.
you were supposed to be, so that you can now be charged with these gifts that you can share with other people and serve with other people. Um, but part of what I do want to explore with you here is that you then stepped into the naturopathic world, right? And when you stepped into the naturopathic world, and you started to now see them using different tools, and you began to talk to us about the bioenergetic assessment, you now started to see something different, right? You're now working with a group of healers who are not only just limited in the frameworks that they have available to them to diagnose and treat you, but you're now stepping into a healing framework that is now treating the physical, emotional, and spiritual being. And that was certainly not something that you had when you were working in the allopathic world, right?
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah.
So give us that contrast, because you now go to this, again, you're progressively brought to this naturopathic doctor, first from your experiences in the health food store, and now seeing differences there. But that's not a naturopathic doctor. That's just an entrepreneur who is helping bring frameworks to folks, natural frameworks to folks. You now get from that, you get teased there, you see these results there, and now you're brought to a naturopath, right? And now you get to this naturopath, and a naturopath is able to use bioenergetic assessments to give you probably probably a better diagnosis for your allergic reactions to different things than the one which gave you 20% false positives.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, she definitely, and more importantly to me, is she helped get to the root of it. Allergies they're a problem, and they're a thing in and of themselves, but they're also a symptom of a bigger problem. And just to me, saying you have allergies is like saying you have a bruise. It doesn't solve the problem. And by going to the naturopath, she helped solve my problem. I mean, I still have some of those allergies. They're class 2, 3 allergies. But the bulk of them are gone. And more importantly, my quality of life is dramatically better by healing my gut. I'm not saying it's all rosy and it's all perfect now, but it's like I am healthier in my 50s than I was in my 20s.
So
This
you so
night
you
night and day.
so she helped you to deal with the physical terrain, right? So
Yes.
that was one piece of it, right?
Mhm.
But now you did say that you were living your life,
Mhm.
in the sympathetic expression of your nervous system, right? You were in fight or flight all the time. How'd she help you there?
She did support my adrenals. I don't know that that really got addressed until a little bit later,
Okay.
honestly. But during that time, I did start exploring churches, right? I started going to every church in my hometown. And I I didn't really find one that I loved, but I just kept going to different ones because I was being called. So there was that the beginning piece of awakening spiritually.
Okay, so give us more on that. So you know you're beginning to understand you know that you are a physical, emotional, and spiritual being. That you begin to heal your terrain physically, and that's now putting you in a position where you now feel called to develop spiritually. And the way you are developing spiritually is as a seeker. You are going from church to church to church. Why do you feel called to going to church? Why didn't you stay with any one church? Why did you bounce to another churches? And ultimately, where did that take you?
A great question. Why didn't I stay? I guess for me, I when and this might I don't want to offend anyone, but when when somebody when it I'm tripping, but I am the answer is formulating inclusion. Like when something excludes others, it doesn't resonate with me. And so, or like the I'm better than someone else because my religion's better. That didn't resonate with me. Although I resonate very deeply with the teachings of Christ, and I am Christian. But when the conversation was more about um, lack and being wrong than about leading, being following in the footsteps of Christ. Like that was more of what I was drawn to. And and I was young too, and probably part of the people. And there's just a variety of um, a variety of things. But there was a moment where I guess I grew up Catholic, so it's coming back. It's not, this isn't stuff I think about very often.
My job is to challenge you.
Well, thank you. So I went to a Bible study that was with Catholics and a priest, and we were studying I think we were studying Mary of Guadalupe, and I'd been to Peru, and I went through all these churches, and underneath the churches were torture chambers of where the Christians came in and tortured the native people if they went and denounced their religion and become Christian. And that even though I walked through, I was 15 in Peru, I didn't really consciously think about, wow, that's really weird to come in the name of Jesus and to kill people. So there was just this tension in me about trying to make a for that to be able to make sense, I guess,
Yeah,
to
so
sell
so
that.
because remember, one of the most important things that we have to do to be successful on a healing journey is that we have to strip away all the blocks to our onboard diagnostic system, right? What resonates with us and what doesn't resonate with us, right? And one of the things that I think is really exciting about the way you're describing your journey is that you went through this process of trial and error physically, where you were trying some things physically, and if they didn't work, you would try something else, and you would try something else. So that was an important part of you now learning about where you were supposed to be physically, right? You were going through this process of trying things and not trying, and having success or not success emotionally, right? Who you were spending time with and what impact was that having on you? We'll talk more about that. But you also did that spiritually, where you went to a place and did it resonate? No, you were brave enough to now go to another place. Did that resonate? No, and not necessarily why it didn't resonate, but it didn't resonate with you. It wasn't good for you. And because you are now going through this cleansing process, what we call here at Tick Boot Camp a prehabilitation, where you are cleansing physically and cleansing emotionally and cleansing spiritually through this trial and error process. You are getting closer and closer to finding your purpose. You're getting closer and closer to determining what your gifts were and how you were supposed to serve the world.
Definitely.
And now all of these sort of coincidences come together where you're moving away from the allopathic world, you're moving to the naturopathic world, and now you start to educate yourself in the naturopathic world. So help us with that. Help us how you then now took all these experiences and all of these these elements of your journey to now go to school and become a naturopath.
So the naturopath that I saw after having her booked up for, when she came to Savannah, she had some friends who were starting a natural remedy company, and they wanted someone who could do a lot of different things. And they said, "Do you know anyone?" And she thought of me. And so they called me and said, "Would you be interested?" And this was about maybe 3 or 4 years after graduating from college. And I was like in the financial world and insurance world. And I was like, I think I do. And my whole family thought I was crazy. They're like, "You're gonna go do what?" Like this was in 96 or 97. There weren't rows and rows of vitamins it was back then, it was Revco, or CVS shelves. So they were like, "You're gonna go do what?" I'm like, "I know, it's crazy, isn't it? But I know this is what I'm supposed to do." So I went and worked with them and helped develop a company. I was the first employee, and just built it out. We're shipping stuff, we're making labels, just all the stuff you do when you're starting a company. And then about 10 years into that, so I'm working with other doctors. We're going to trade shows, and I get to go listen to the lectures that the doctors, that I go to now for education. I got to sit in those for 10 years. There's not a lot of people coming to the booths when the lectures are going on. So I would go listen to the lectures. And all my people that that would call and needed help with supplements or, the remedies that we sold, they would say, "Why aren't you a provider? Why aren't you a practitioner?" And I would just say, "I feel like I'm helping more people by helping you." Because, if I have 500 providers and they have 500 patients, that's more people than I can see in a day. And that worked for me for the first 10 years. And it was true and I believed it. But then something shifted, and I was like, "No, I need to work with patients." And in January of 2008, I decided to leave my job of 10 years and start seeing patients. And I didn't even have my degree, but was well trained in the bioenergetic assessment. So, I've always worked under other providers. In Georgia, as a naturopath, that's what you need to do. And so they trained me, and I learned a lot from each provider that I worked with. And I went to school online, so it took me 4 years to get my naturopathic degree online. And it's been an amazing journey of learning just all of it. Like every single step has been very clear and very illuminated of this is the next right thing. And the door has opened, and I have no one to walk through it. And I've been really blessed because of that. So there's always tension. It's not like I just knew. It takes a little moment to come to realize, okay, this is what I need to do. But I'm grateful for the capacity to listen. This, when I'm called,
So
I listen.
So let's talk about the Amen clinics. You worked for Amen, so talk to us about how you got there and what that experience was like.
Okay. Um, Again, another amazing, divinely guided experience. Um, a colleague and friend of mine was going to lecture at an A4M conference, And she was telling me about it, and this notion, I was like, I really should go with her. But I don't really know why. And I called her and I was like, do you want me to go support you? Like, she didn't have anyone else going. She was presenting. And so I thought, I could hand out flyers or take names, like just support her in some way. It's like, I'll pay my own way, but I just feel like you're going to need some support there. And she said, wow, I just had a really rough day. Like, that would mean a lot to me. And so we went and I helped her. She was the first presentation of the whole weekend. And we thought, then we were done. I'm like, thinking to myself, that's it. Like, I wonder why I needed to come. And then she looks down at, like, well, where should we go now? She said, well, there's this adrenal conference that looks great. I'm like, you could give that that adrenal workshop. Like, Dr. Amen is speaking. We need to go see him. And I, read Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. And so we went into his presentation late. And he came over during a break and introduced himself. And he said, hey, he found out we were from Atlanta. And he said, hey, I just opened a clinic in Atlanta. We're like, oh, that's amazing. And he said, well, I'm going to be there in 3 days. And we're like, all right, well, we'll come see you. And he said, I'm also looking for a clinic director. And I'm thinking, I know the person. And so I got a resume from my friend and gave it to him at the next event. And she got the job to be the clinic director. And then when they were branching out and looking for a brain map and neurofeedback provider, they thought of me. So that's when I started working there, and I still am there 1 day a week.
Okay. So, and I want to get Matt involved. Matt has finally been able to join us from work. So, Matt, why don't you come and join us? Let's talk about, Matt has interviewed many people from the Amen Clinic. I've interviewed fewer, but I really like the practitioners we've interviewed from Amen. And I really like the brain-centered approach that they take, right? Because the brain is the center of our physical being. It's the center of our emotional being, and it's the center of our spiritual being, right? So we again, you and I have been on this path where from even before we came online, we've been talking about the three elements of who we are as humans. And of course the physical expression of our brain is of course we sense, perceive, think, feel, and act, right? So we have that's the physical expression of our brain. The
Yeah.
emotional expression of our brain is that we have our beliefs that trigger our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, our results, which then reinforce our beliefs, right? So it's all centered on our beliefs. And of course, those beliefs are going to send down the channel of what we're going to sense and how we're going to perceive it. And of course, our brain is also, depending on the state it's in, we can through our subconscious elements of our brain, when we have the proper emotional expression, can now our unconscious or subconscious can connect to consciousness, how we connect to each other and how we connect to everything, right? So that's all brain centered. And our brain is really the most important organ that will control everything from the day we were born until the day we die. But we are never trained anything about our brain, right? So it's one of the things that I wanted to sort of bring together for the three of us to talk about, right? Because once we understand that organ, and once we understand the importance of that organ, now we can get to the other pieces of your expertise, which is the bioenergetic assessment, the neural feedback, and the energy healing, right? That all sounds woo-woo until you understand the brain and you understand the role of the brain and all that. So bring that together for us. Talk to us about how now you're now led to the Amen Clinic. And at the Amen Clinic, where a traditional Harvard-educated psychiatrist is now working with someone like you, a naturopathic doctor who is trained in bioenergetic assessment, neural feedback, and energy healing.
So the energy healing came after I started working at the Amen Clinic.
Okay.
And I don't do it there. And the really all I do at the Amen Clinic is the brain map and neurofeedback. And but some of the providers I invited them to see the bioenergetic assessment, which I do at the clinic in Roswell, and they refer to me. They've seen the results. When I like we collaborate, so I might see someone that I think, wow, you really need to go to the Amen Clinic first, and then the Amen Clinic doctors will see what I've been able to do, and then they'll take it from there. But they can see, wow, you've really done a great job so far, and vice versa. They because of that, they can send them back for to work on the gut, or they might be suspicious of Lyme or suspicious of um, parasites or yeast or whatever the toxin may be and the terrain imbalance. So they'll do their part, and now they have more functional doctors on board. But some of the providers, I've been there since 2013, I think. And so some of the providers and I have been working together a long time. So we still have that working relationship. So they'll still send people to me, and they've seen the evidence of the work. So they know it's powerful, it's non-invasive. So if they have kids who don't like needles, I can still, do an assessment and help. So it's a collaborative relationship, but not everyone, even I don't even know if all the doctors know all the things that I offer there. When I'm there, I'm solely a brain map and a neurofeedback provider.
So tie the three things together, again, I'm not letting Matt talk at all, but it's his fault because he got here late. Tie the three things together.
I'm
Matt,
really
I'll give you
here.
green
I'm
on
not,
this.
it's true.
Can you now give us a description or a definition of what bioenergetic assessments are, what neural feedback is, and what energy healing is, and what is the thread that ties all those together for you as a practitioner?
So I'll answer the last question first, and then I'll get to the others. But the thread is the bioenergetic assessment is looking at the physical, and the brain map and neurofeedback is looking at the mental, emotional, and the energy healing is working with the emotional and, I believe, spiritual. So it's a well-rounded approach from my point of view.
And mine.
Awesome. So with the bioenergetic testing, even though it is energy, it is directed at looking at the terrain. We can, and I know I talked about earlier, but I'll just circle back and just give a little bigger description of it. But in essence, the heart of a bioenergetic assessment device is actually the same heart as the neurofeedback device, or a lie detector test, or an EKG unit. So it's measuring electrical skin resistance. And with bioenergetic assessment, it was founded by Reinhard Voll, who was a medical doctor in Germany in the 40s and 50s. And he had traveled to China and had been trained in acupuncture. And these French folks brought the early version of bioenergetic assessment to him in Germany as the head of a hospital. And he got really curious. He's like, well, the acupuncture points he found had a different resistance. So it could, when you put electrical current in an acupuncture point, it will respond. If you just put it on skin that has no acupuncture point, the skin doesn't respond. So he got really curious about that. And he had all the current medical testing in his hospital, so he could compare the findings from the bioenergetic testing to the findings from the labs that he did. And so he charted out he used acupuncture as the framework, but then he confirmed, when the liver meridian is stressed, he would also see some markers in labs. So he was the pioneer of it, and he found that the first thing that he was doing was looking at the organs, testing acupuncture points, seeing how well it conducted electricity. If it went up really high on the meter is 0 to 100. If it went above 65, he noted there was a correlation with inflammation. And back then, nobody was really talking a lot about inflammation. Now, like, it's everywhere. But even when I started, inflammation was like, that happens when you sprain your foot. It wasn't really talked about that much. And if the reading went below 45, it was more of a chronic, like the body was losing the battle. so to speak. And that was all he did with bioenergetic assessment for quite some time. But then one time a man came in with a jacket, and in his jacket was a homeopathic remedy. And all of a sudden the readings looked dramatically better, and he couldn't really figure out why. And so he took the vial fell out. So, and all of a sudden the readings looked normal, the way they had been before. So you keep putting the vial on, it looks normal. You take the vial off, it doesn't look normal. So that was the advent of testing remedies against the energy field. And it's become much more elaborate. Muscle testing was born out of this technology, and it's based on physics, not chemistry. So it seems woo-woo, but it is based on science. It's just a different science. And there's 3 great books by Lynn McTaggart: The Field, The Intention Experiment, and The Power of Eight, where she's an investigative journalist. She went all over the world and researched, talked with um, the top physicist and quantum physicist in the world, and began to break down. Her question was, why does homeopathy work? And she got her answer. And so anybody who's looking to understand the science behind these things, it's in all of those books. So that's bioenergetic assessment. And brain map is looking at the brain waves. So we put a cap on, it measures 19 areas, and we're looking to see, we're looking at delta, which is the sleep mostly related to, or the brainwave mostly related to sleep, and theta, which is the daydreamy creative state, brainwave alpha, which is our neutral state. If we're driving or playing the piano, if we've been playing the piano for a long time, we don't have to think so deeply about what we're doing. And if we're learning something new, we recruit beta waves. So the brain map will look at all of those brain waves, and we'll see what's too high, what's too low. And then the brain map is a correlative science. So it's not like we're looking at an x-ray to see, oh, that arm is broken or not broken. But there's certain patterns. When we see beta really high on the right, it correlates strongly to anxiety. So I do the map, and then I say, hey, do you have any trouble with anxiety? And then they'll say yes. And so we know what their pattern is through the brain map. And then that guides us to do neurofeedback. So neurofeedback is retraining those brain waves. So in that example, we would reward the brain anytime beta went down. And we would inhibit I guess with neurofeedback now, they're watching a movie. So the reward is the movie continues to play. And if their brain waves, let's say that beta goes high on the right, then the movie goes dark. And the brain says, hey, I want to see what's going on. And it'll go back to doing what it was doing. And we're basically capturing that behavior. And, over 30 to 60 sessions, that beta will come down, and most people report a relief in their anxiety symptoms. So I'll take a breath because I know I've just been.
Yeah, so I think that's really interesting. So how you're changing neural pathways is by rewarding or inhibiting the theta versus beta
Brainwave.
brainwaves.
Yeah. And those brain waves are the neurotransmitters firing. When they fire, they make electricity. And so that's what we're measuring.
So wow, so what happens is what's happening here is that the neural pathways that are not serving the patient begin to dissipate and get utilized less often, and the pathways that are serving the patient are being reinforced by that pathway, wiring together as a result of it firing together.
Yes. And just a nuanced distinction there. The old pathway never goes away. We're just laying a new one on top of it. So it still is powerful. And when someone's done with neurofeedback, they're done. They don't come back for tune-ups, or, they don't have to keep coming to see me. They're done, unless there's an additional trauma or, injury to the brain. But yeah, what you said is absolutely true.
So you're mapping so connect this to beliefs, right? How do you connect neural pathways to beliefs, and how can the mapping of better pathways impact the removal of beliefs that are not serving versus beliefs that are serving someone?
I haven't found that beliefs play a big role with neurofeedback. So it bypasses that. Like I've had children who think they're stupid because they have ADD or a learning disability and their brain waves get changed and they're not stupid anymore. But someone, when you're doing a therapy where they have a belief system, you're constantly bumping up against that. But with neurofeedback, I don't see us bumping up against anything. They get better or they don't, but it's not because of their belief system. That's my belief system. But I haven't seen any research that says, if somebody believes it's not going to work, it doesn't work. Like it's been amazing that way. Like I have adults, I have kids who get better even though they think it's not going to work.
Well, but I don't mean believing whether it's going to work or it's not
Yeah.
going to work. Aren't beliefs really just neural pathways? Aren't they? Aren't you ultimately believing something or not believing something? Or let me describe it. All beliefs are, we always have, we all have beliefs.
Yeah.
They're either serving us or they're not serving us, right?
Yes.
And the beliefs that are serving us, aren't they just neural pathways that are quickly um, giving us a response to a stimuli versus a belief pattern that is not serving us? And it really, aren't you just changing beliefs by changing pathways?
Honestly, I've never thought of it that way. So anything I say from this point forward, I'll just be like speaking.
Yeah,
uh,
it's just a conversation. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So I I see what you're saying for sure. I'm just trying to apply that to what I see in practice. And I guess when they come, they have a belief system, most people, um, that they can heal and that, like, I'm just trying to think of people like,
Yeah, so let's walk it back to the
yeah,
conversation we were having earlier about you,
yeah,
right?
about me. Yes.
And we were talking about how you had a neurology that was not serving you well, meaning you were not you were physically vulnerable, you were emotionally vulnerable because of these pathways that had developed during the course of your life as a result of traumatic or the perception of traumatic experiences. And because you had pathways that were designed to protect you, they weren't serving you when it came to allowing your immune system to function at the optimal level, and it made you more vulnerable to be sick, right? And weren't
Yeah.
all those pathways beliefs that had developed during the course of your experiences, certainly the first 25 years of your experiences, and now aren't you with with your neural feedback changing those beliefs energetically by identifying those pathways that are not serving someone and building, you were saying, on top of those pathways, those pathways that are now going to serve them, and you're identifying those that are serving them versus those that are not serving them by looking at the theta versus beta brainwaves. And that's sort of like the onboard diagnostic system saying this is serving you versus not serving you, and you're now
Mhm.
looking at it in a way um, that's really cool and unique that I'd never thought of before.
Yeah. So I can, I'm, I'm a thinker, so I might not be able to answer your question exactly in that way at this moment. But what I can say is, um, like Bessel van der Kolk wrote the book The Body Keeps Score, and he's one of the pioneers in somatic healing of helping to integrate trauma into the body using somatic like EMDR or brain spotting. He has a whole chapter designated to neurofeedback. And what he found was that the trauma victims that he was working with responded dramatically better to his work of repatterning when they did neurofeedback, because neurofeedback calms the nervous system. That beta wave being really high is going to be someone in an anxious state whose nervous system is on overdrive. If we change that, their nervous system can settle. So they will be able to change their beliefs. So I don't know that neurofeedback changes the beliefs, but I'll find out. Trust me, it's a great question and I'm really curious
Okay.
about it. But I can say that I see people becoming a better version of themselves. They are able to make better decisions. They're able to change the course because their brainwaves are balanced. Does that it kind of gets us in the ballpark of what you're
Well,
asking?
it is, yeah. So, I mean, again, that's what I'm trying to explore with you. I mean, I saw an interview with Lisa Feldman Barrett or Lisa Barrett Feldman. I remember she's a professor, professor that was interviewed by Tom Billion, and she was kind of critical of the author that you had just cited, because she said it is not the body that keeps the score; it's the brain that keeps the score. And it's a misnomer to argue that your body is keeping the score. And if she's right, and I think she is, although it's a cool title that the body keeps a score, it's really, I think it's a misnomer. It's really the brain that's keeping the score, and the brain is constantly keeping the score during the entirety of our lives. And we have all these pathways that are developing, and I believe pathways are beliefs. And of course, a pathway has both a protein element, which is this pathway it develops, and then, of course, it has this energetic, because the energy is going down the pathway, right? And our brain, because it's an energy hog, and because we use so much energy. Our brain uses so much energy, and we have to have enough energy for the rest of our body, despite it being a small organ, as compared to the totality of our body. What our brain is always doing is creating shortcuts, right? And sometimes the shortcuts are serving us, and sometimes the shortcuts are not serving us. Or sometimes the shortcuts served us in parts of our lives or early years in our lives, and they're not serving us any longer. And what it sounds like you're doing, and I don't know if this is true or not, I'm speaking aloud just the way you are, this is unwashed, is it sounds to me that you're identifying those pathways that are not serving people based on the wave that you're able to identify during the assessment. And then when you're able to identify the waves that are not serving versus the waves that are serving, you're then able to build a new pathway that will have a proper wave that will then change the pathway that's no longer serving the patient, and therefore, I believe, changing a belief.
I think that's a very reasonable
Theory.
possibility. Theory. Yeah.
Dr. Powers, real quick, I just, and to not derail us too much, 'cause I think there's more here to be said, but I want to better understand what you meant when you said it lays on top of the pathway, doesn't replace the pathway. Can you describe that? Because, in having a lot of these Amen Clinic doctors on, they've talked to us about the brain and different imagery and then the pathways, but that's a new concept. And I want to make sure we understand that when people listen to this podcast.
Yeah. So if we have a habit, that the neuronal networks for that habit get wired, and it's always there, just like someone with an addiction with 12 steps. So they're aware that they have this propensity, so that pathway is there, but they make a new pathway, whether it's through neurofeedback or going to meetings every day, that it lays over it. So it's not replacing it. It doesn't make the old pathway go away. There's just, when you develop a new habit and you really strengthen it, it's going to be a bigger pathway. And it's going to, as Rich was saying, it's the most efficient way. So once it becomes the neurons, the pathway becomes thick and encoded with the proteins, then that's going to be the biggest path, the one that the brain chooses to go to. But yet it's all, the other one's always there. Like people, who have old habits, they talk about it's not so hard to fall back into an old habit, but it's much easier to get back into the new habit. Or they're able to, some people make a new habit and they always do that. But does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. And I just wonder, with all of these pathways, how they impact the rest of our biology, right? Because, a lot of people have talked about the way our brain can control our endocrine system and our hormones, right? So replacing a bad pathway that may be related to an addiction or a bad habit with a new pathway that can be, more positive in nature, how does that impact us downstream from there? So I guess my question is the brain the hub and then controlling our hormones and everything else underneath? Or is there something deeper, if that makes sense?
I think it depends on who you ask. there's a whole science of heart math where they talk about how the heart emits frequency and it responds quicker than the brain. So there's some people that think the brain is responding to the heart, but if the heart is responding in that fever state, then that's going to make the hormones. So, but they're working together, and we're in one sense splitting hairs, but like they're a team, and the brain certainly is. You can't live without either one of them. You have to have a heart and you have to have a brain, and the brain is certainly calling a lot of the shots. But I personally believe with the heart math folks that the heart plays a really big role in how the brain responds to things. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I just wonder, right, that I think there's so many components to this. So we're speaking about bioenergetic techniques and neurofeedback and things like that. But we also know that you have a great background in homeopathy and herbology and detoxification. So I can't help but wonder how much those things help change the brain for the better as well. So neurofeedback plus these supplemental, I'll call them protocols, right, or things you can do, have a greatly positive impact on the brain, and therefore allow our bodies to have less inflammation and be more acceptable to healing modalities when we try to kill off things in our body. And as Rich was saying, right, the terrain, not necessarily the bug, right? So we're helping support the terrain and make ourselves be healthier. So can you kind of tie it all together, neurofeedback plus these other things having a positive impact on the brain and ultimately healing?
I'd love to. Thank you. So I first start with naturopathy 95% of the time, because neurofeedback is more time consuming and more costly. So I feel like if the terrain is out of balance and they have a bunch of bugs, or if they're in a moldy house or they have a gluten allergy, the neurofeedback training is less effective. It is hard to out-train a gluten allergy, and it's hard to train a brain that's being constantly inflamed by mold or Lyme. So by getting the terrain reestablished and getting the pathogens either eliminated or minimized, half the people that would come to me for neurofeedback don't even need neurofeedback after that. But for some people, it's like we just gutted the house and we have to put it back together again, and neurofeedback will help that. Or the people with adverse childhood events, or like adverse childhood events have a bigger, because the brain is still developing, it has a bigger impact on the brain than a trauma that happens to an untraumatized brain as a child. So people sometimes can heal quicker from a trauma as an adult. So, but either way, if there's trauma involved, sometimes neurofeedback's needed to help calm the nervous system. It's hard to probiotics and GABA and all of those inhibitory 5-HTP, all the supplements that I can use, they can make a difference, but then they're stuck on it, like that's not changing the brain. So I have recently heard that maybe it does, but for the past 20 years, I was thinking it wasn't. So I feel like the way that I do the work is I do bioenergetic assessment first. And then if they still need support, I will introduce neurofeedback. And then the energy healing, that class I took in 2019 and then in 2020. So we weren't even able to meet in person the last half of the class. It was an 18-month, 400-hour course supervised by the chiropractor leading it. And there's different types of energy healing. I was more interested in the energy of the different systems of the body, the energy of the brain, the energy of the stomach and the liver. So I learned techniques of how to bring energetic balance to those. And that's the thing I do the least. It's the thing most people are the least interested in. But when I do it, it's really powerful. I had a woman who had blood pressure issues, and medication was not balancing it. I did one session on her and her blood pressure was balanced for 6 months. And she came back and I did one more session and it stayed balanced again. So, and I need to follow up with her, but I don't know if that's a long-term I haven't seen her since then because I referred her out to another provider for something else. But the fact that it could make a difference for 6 months for something that was dysregulated for also, many, many months, it's a powerful healing tool. But because I already had my practice was already full in a way with the other things that I was doing, I don't have a ton of space for it, but the people that do it love it, and it does make a big difference for them. Did I
So
tie it together?
yeah, no, you did excellent. I have a couple other questions and patterns in my head I want to ask you. The first one is, we're always looking to identify tips and recommendations for people listening to this podcast, because healing can be so confusing, right? You have different practitioners saying different things, but I think there are some things that are just no-brainers, that are not guesses or theories or hunches. And I think one of them is, you said earlier that if you're doing neurofeedback and you're not getting help, it's likely because you're exposed to mold, you have a gluten intolerance, and you're consuming large amounts of gluten, or you have some sort of untreated wild infection that needs to be addressed. So is that an accurate surmise of what you said earlier?
Yes, and I would spread it out from gluten, like a food sensitivity that somebody's eating every day. But yes.
Okay, so then if you think you've identified the pathogens, the toxins, the mold exposure, the food sensitivities, et cetera, and you're still not feeling better, and you think you're in fight or flight still, and you sense that it can be brain related, that's when I think you're saying neurofeedback comes in your practice. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you use the bioenergetic assessment to identify what supplements to use to help address the mold and the toxins and the pathogens, et cetera. Is that correct? That's one of your first steps?
Yes, but the bioenergetic assessment can also energetically assess if there's mold, if there's Borrelia, if there's a parasite. So I use it to guide the supplements, but
Got it.
yeah, so it's just
So
distinguished, but it gives us a lot of information. It's not just take this supplement or that supplement. It's telling me, like, I will ask it. I'm asking the body, does this supplement agree with you? But I have to know what supplement to ask for, right?
right.
So for, I have 50 things I could give them if they have Borrelia, but I want to see which one resonates with their body.
Right. So it's really twofold, the bioenergetic assessment. It's, what do I think you have in your body from this assessment? Mold, Borrelia, toxins, et cetera. And then what can I give you that will work well and best with your biology in your individualized body to treat it as well? And then you start there. And then if needed, and the brain is stuck in these negative neural pathways, then you're doing neurofeedback. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm trying to simplify it for myself. So please expand upon it, but I'm just trying to make sure I'm grasping everything you're saying.
Thank you. So we look at the systems as well. So what's the energetic state of the liver, the kidneys, the lymphatics, the stomach, spleen, pancreas, all of it. So we look at organs, we look at pathogens, we look at solutions.
How would you address the organs? Is it the same thing? You're using herbs and things like that to address strengthening the organs?
Yes. So that's the most important piece, is the terrain to me. Like, if the terrain, I'm preaching to the choir here, but if the terrain is in balance and the channels aren't open, there's just, how's anything going to change? That's like trying to empty out a hoarder's house when all the doors and windows are slammed shut. So the first thing we have to do is the terrain. And I do use homeopathics, which are extremely powerful, and herbs and supplementation.
Got it. Now, a lot of people, and I will admit, and Rich knows this, and I don't know that I've ever said this publicly, but we had a guest on early on, about 5 years ago, who talked about all of these things you're discussing: bioenergetic assessments, neurofeedback. And I'm not going to lie, I thought she was nuts. And it was a patient, right? And I very much was judgmental. And I've come to realize that I was really wrong, very, very wrong, as I've grown and learned from the Lyme community. So for those that are where I was 5 years ago, can you just give us some, stories, facts, stats, science to back up the, proof behind this, that it's not some woo-woo made up witchcraft,
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about it being based on physics, not chemistry. And, I have some stats, they're old. I used to have a dentist before the cone beam x-ray. I had a dentist beg me to do bioenergetics assessment on root canal teeth, or with wisdom teeth that had been extracted to see if there was any energetic evidence of infection, because you couldn't really tell with the x-rays. Now there's a cone beam. I don't do that assessment anymore. And he's retired. But he told me that when I found infection and he went in and did, they did surgery, that 95% of the time he would find infection. So I have that. I've worked with several functional medicine doctors, and sometimes they would use me as like to go in and do the first pass, so to speak. Let's see what shows up. And then they'll go and do the labs, because, you know, if you're suspicious of 10 things, that could be $10,000 worth of labs. And so they would use me as, well, let's target it and run that one lab. And that doctor said I was right 85% of the time. There's not a lot of, nobody wants to pay me and pay a doctor. So I don't have a lot of stats on that. And certainly nobody's outside of that is going to be paying for a big research project on this yet. So
no, but that data is really good. And I just want to point out that the Lyme test that you get when you go give blood at your standard LabCorp or Quest is far less accurate than what you're describing, right? So you have to weigh that in. There's no definitive Lyme test. And even if there were, what strain, there's so many factors and variables. Never mind, chronic Lyme is never just Borrelia, right? And that's really the most important factor here. So I have to think that if somebody's struggling to figure out what to do and they're not getting better and they need a new doctor and they come see you, then you can use your bioenergetic assessment to identify most likely what is wrong and then treat that as a grouping of things, because it's probably not just one thing, and ultimately save them time, headache, money, and misery of the illness, right? So that's kind of the pattern I'm seeing here. Is this is a really nice way to get some additional clues that you couldn't get otherwise.
Absolutely. And I would add to that, if someone isn't getting better with the traditional like if they know they have Lyme and they've been through the traditional model, I have helped a lot of people with that. But also, I do believe like the trauma piece is the thing that people aren't addressing, and the teeth as well. Like if there's most people can handle a little bit of infection in their mouth if they're not dealing with Lyme and they're not in a stressful, their life isn't going crazy. But you have all of those, sometimes it can be hard to get over it. And even spirochetes can live in teeth. There was a study done, they're in the 1920s, they were pulling out teeth from root canal, people with root canals, and implanting it in rabbits. And the rabbits would get the diseases that the host had, like rheumatoid arthritis or MS. They didn't call it MS back then. So the dental piece is something to look at, and that's, that would be finding a holistic dentist or a biological dentist, or the trauma piece. And I feel like EMDR and brain spotting are big pieces to that. And then of course I've helped a lot of people who've done 2 years worth of antibiotics, and every time they come off, they feel worse. It takes a lot longer for those folks, but yeah, I have helped them.
Couple questions to that. So the oral health component, one of them is, I think you're saying there can be a lot of pathogens, bacteria, et cetera, in the mouth, and that can be a source to our prolonged illness and potentially why we're not getting better if we're not addressing the oral health. But I think in addition to that, what about the heavy metals, right? What about all of the fillings and things like that? Because we've had doctors and researchers come on and say, depending on the human body, some of these metals being used to fill our cavities can be more toxic. So the metal there, Rich and I get the same metal in a filling. It destroys me and makes me crippled, but Rich is fine because of how we react to that metal. Is that a factor too? I think it's twofold there when it comes to oral health.
Yes, I think metals are a factor. I rarely see someone under 30 with a metal filling. So it's becoming less and less. And I'm careful about that, because if we bring up metals, if somebody decides, well, I'm going to go get them removed, they have to be done safely. There's an organization called IAOMT.org where you can look up someone who's been trained to do it safely, because back when I first started working for the company, when I was 26, a doctor, a chiropractor came. I met a chiropractor who had all of her fillings removed. She felt great for a day and then was paralyzed the day after. And that was my introduction to heavy metal toxicity. And I'm just uber careful to make sure that if I bring up metals, that we also know it has to be done well. Any person that has not listened to me has come back and said, God, I wish I listened to you. They get autoimmune diseases, their symptoms get worse. So yes, it's a piece and it has to be done well. And I've also seen people get well without having to address that, because when you pull out mercury fillings, if it's a big one, then you most likely end up with a crown, and then you end up that crown will eventually fail and you end up with an implant. And so it's a big deal. And what if we just have to take enough of the burden off for the body to heal? So that's not my go-to move for people because it's so expensive and it can create, you know, other things. It's important, and I'm not minimizing it. And I have relationships with many of the holistic dentists here because they are so valuable. But just for anybody who's listening, I don't want them to go to their traditional dentist and say, get them all out. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think you're right that our job should be to lessen the burden as much as we possibly can to achieve symptom-free, a symptom-free healthy lifestyle. But I think that there's so many components here, right? You know, the oral health component, you can have Lyme, Borrelia in your, in the mouth. We've heard about this a lot, but Borrelia can cross the blood-brain barrier and go into the brain. These metals that are used for fillings could also cross the blood-brain barrier and go into the brain. The trauma that you described causes neurological changes after prolonged trauma, right? So never mind these other things have an impact as well. So I think our job has to be to address the brain as much as possible. If these traditional homeopathic remedies, these herbs, detoxification routes aren't working, we have to address the brain. Otherwise, we're not going to get better. And I think that's an important note. But what is it? Is it the metal? Is it the bacteria in the mouth? Is it the trauma? And I think it could be a combination of all of them. But we have to try to one by one remove these layers to see what really is our biggest problem with us individually.
Yes, and I think most providers, we try to get the area of most leverage that's the least expensive,
Yeah.
And so it's a big piece. And talking about the metals, or if somebody is going through the process, most likely their provider is trying to do like what I'm trying to do, but if it's not working, there's just other layers that we have to get to, but we didn't go to that one first for their benefit, right? Like, so I've seen, I use the testing because it kind of guides. Like when I first started working at the clinic where I am now, I'm highly sensitive to mold, and these people would come in and they would smell like, I'm like, oh, it's a mold problem. And my mentor, the founder of the clinic, would get them well without ever addressing the mold. Mold didn't show up energetically. They weren't being impacted by the mold. And so it was a big lesson for me because I would have just assumed that, oh, I mean, it would make me sick. I would like have to take binders during their appointment to be able to finish the appointment. And yeah, just so all of that is to say it's hard to know the entry point. And every provider is trying to figure out the entry point. And part of it is our training, our experience, and us trying to figure out what works most of the time for the least amount of money for them. Right.
Yeah.
And so there's so many different paths that you can go, and everybody ends up, the ones who don't their problem isn't solved with the first initial ones. It's just because those other ones, we haven't gotten there yet. We're not that far down the elimination process yet. Did I answer your question?
100%. And if you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing Rich's face. So I had to give him an opportunity to speak because he looked like he was about to jump out of his seat before to say something. So if you're not watching on YouTube, you should check us out on YouTube because watching our facial expressions is probably more entertaining than not. So Rich, what were you going to say?
Well, what I'm going to say is I'm sorry you're here, Matt. I have so many questions I want to ask.
Oh my God.
I'm just kidding, Doctor.
Oh, my husband might want dinner soon.
So I mean, I have to say I'm blown away by this conversation, not only by what you're sharing with you were sharing with me, but what you were also sharing with Matt, because it's helping me to really clarify my thoughts on so many different things that I've been thinking through lately. So one of the early experiences that Matt and I had is that we interviewed Dorothy Leland from LymeDisease.org. And she's one of the authors that I had read before we even started this podcast. And what Dorothy had shared with us was that her daughter, Rachel, who we subsequently interviewed a couple of years later, was symptomatic, even though she had cleared the bugs. And it wasn't until she went through a neural retraining that her symptoms dissipated. And but for both me and Matt at the time, this is, we're talking about 4.5 years ago when we interviewed one of our earlier interviews, and like really stuck with us. So like there's something here about neural pathways that's causing illness. And it's been something that we've continued to work on. Fast forward just last year, Rachel and her mom had published a book, and we interviewed Rachel and Dorothy, and I spent a lot of time reading the book. And I spent a lot of time, grilling Rachel on her neural retraining and the importance of neural retraining for symptomatic relief. So this has been the sort of thing that we've been really struggling with and thinking about. And I'm really to the point right now, and I may be wrong, but I'm really at the point right now where I believe that all illness and all symptoms are because of neural pathways that are not serving us any longer. And again, I'm speaking aloud, but as I'm listening to you outline the way that you and Matt were talking about healing or becoming well, I was thinking about the patterns that we've observed that we call the PALM framework, right? And what we found is that the people who are successful in getting well go through a process of prehabilitation, where they're dealing with all the terrain issues that they had first. Then they go through a process of assisting their immune system to lower the microbial load. We call that assist rather than kill, because we focus on terrain and the immune system rather than on the tools you're using to kill the bugs. Then there is this process of rehabilitation. And in our view, or at least in our experiences, it's really the people who go through a neural rehabilitation that allows them to become symptom-free. And then there's the maintenance phase, right? And you have to go through the process of maintaining the healthy neural pathways. But I never really had the ability until today, and listening to your brilliant conversation with us, that it helped me to understand what my gut has been telling me for almost 5 years, which is it's all neurology. It's all neural pathways. And what you taught here today, using the same, by the way, Matt and I are Italian, so we always going to bring Parmesan in. We always bring the Parm in, right? It's that you're using tools that are bringing people through a prehabilitation process. You're priming their brain so that the neural feedback can work, right? Because it can't work if your brain is inflamed. It can't work if the inflammation is caused by mold, if the inflammation is caused by bugs in the brain, if the inflammation is caused by heavy metals passing through the blood-brain barrier. Because whatever is going on there in the brain, whatever's causing that inflammation, you can't. It sounds to me, and I want your thoughts on this. It sounds like the neural feedback is not going to work, or the neural retraining is not going to work, because the pathways can't be retrained when they're in this inflamed state. And you have to go through this process of reducing the inflammation and reducing the bugs and allowing neural I guess the neural pathways to open up so that you can drain the brain. I guess that only happens when they're sleeping, right? The glial system will and then after you're able to get that inflammation down, then you can train the pathways. And another thought I just want to share with you is it sounds like that childhood trauma and the pathways that are created by childhood trauma make it more likely that you'll get sick and it makes it harder to overcome the illness because those pathways that are not serving you well, maybe did during the traumatic experience, but no longer serving you well, become the dominant pathways, which are then causing you to be vulnerable to illness and maybe continue to be symptomatic even after the bugs have been cleared. And I know I threw a lot out there, but give me your thoughts on that.
So I first want to say I don't know a lot of naturopaths who do neurofeedback. So I have a unique point of view. So maybe not all neurofeedback providers would agree with my comments about the inflammation, but from my experience, when I see when people come in and they've tried everything, they might say, I tried neurofeedback and it didn't help. And when we address all these other things and then we do neurofeedback, it helps. And neurofeedback it's amazing, and I'm a great provider, but it's pretty standard. So it's not that practitioner dependent. And a lot of, I mean, there's a little bit of it that's,
What do you mean? It's not.
When you see the map, like the map tells you what to do and it's really clear. So it's not, we practice similarly. Like in functional medicine, like we do practice similarly, but there's a lot of variability. But in neurofeedback, a lot of us do pretty similar things. So my assumption is that the reason why it didn't really work the first time is because these other pieces weren't addressed, because when we address them, they get better. I don't have a lot of research on that, on the inflammation piece, but the adverse events for sure. And, you know, if you think about it, if someone is stuck in fight or flight, they're burning through their adrenals. The adrenals play a big role in modulating the immune system and fighting inflammation. So if they've spent 30 years in fight or flight, then of course their body's going to really struggle in fighting these things. So they've aged, so to speak. You know, they've burned through systems that weren't really designed for that. Did I address it?
Yeah. So at a high level, so I understand. So your argument is that there's, again, we keep talking about these different pieces, right?
Yeah.
So the HPA axis is in this loop where you constantly have these stress chemicals teeming through your system, right? And because you get into this physiological loop of having cortisol and adrenaline teeming through your system, you begin to
They get tired.
essentially burn out your adrenals, right? And you're just constantly in fight or flight, and you have to find a way of modulating your HPA axis and your cortisol receptors, or you're not going to be healthy. And I can share with you, and I've shared with our listeners before. I mean, having myself lived most of my life in in the sympathetic expression of my nervous system. It wasn't until I learned about the HPA axis and I learned about my cortisol receptors, and I started taking the HPA balance, which then modulated my cortisol receptors, that I became a more emotionally healthy person. Now, part of it was learning about the difference between the systems and learning what was happening, but in addition to the emotional piece of it, there's a physiological piece that we have to focus on, so that we can now live more of our life in the parasympathetic expression of our nervous system rather than the sympathetic expression of our nervous system. But so I'm with you on all that, and I'm living proof of that, right? But I want to focus more on the bigger piece that we were just focusing on, because I think the reason neurofeedback may not be working is because it's being used at the wrong stage. And what I really like about the conversation we're having today, because Matt and I are always looking for shortcuts that we can bring to people in the community, is it sounds to me like that the neurofeedback is a shortcut. Because people who are doing programs like DNRS, they need 6 months, 12 months. I mean, I think Rachel Matten, correct me if I'm wrong, my recollection is
It's been a while.
that I think she said it was an unbelievably rigorous program that required a great deal of work every single day. for months and months and months, and ultimately was successful. And she feels really blessed by having discovered that rehabilitative tool. But I feel like you have the ability to diagnose the pathways that are not serving, and to use your term, rebuild pathways that will serve you on top of those substantially faster than someone who is going through the process of retraining themselves with a program like DNRS.
Yeah, I know of I know of DNSR, and I know of it. I don't know that much about it. I know it's more economical than neurofeedback. So like if somebody doesn't have the resources to do neurofeedback, I think that is a great resource. And I've had patients tell me it changed their life. That's how I learned about it, because they told me about it. But yeah, when they talk about what they have to do, I'm like, whoa, like that's really intense. So thank God it's available. And if somebody has more time than money, it's a great resource. But like if somebody is trying to hold down a job and they have the resources, I think it moves fast, like 30 to 60 sessions. If we're doing 3 sessions a week, we'll be done in 10 weeks or 20 weeks. So if somebody chooses to come once a week, we're at the same pace, but they only had to do it once a week and not every day. So I think there's a place for both of them, right? And each person has to decide.
Yeah. No, and what will resonate with one patient is not going to resonate with another patient. And we spend a lot of time, urging people to husband their resources so that they can have the resources that they need to have available to them, so that they can have the shortcuts, right? Because money is faster than time.
Yes.
And when you've been suffering, I mean, Matt suffered horrifically for years.
Yeah.
If he could have had a shortcut
Yep.
to becoming well and to resolving his symptoms, I'm sure he would have done whatever he could to speed up that process.
Yes.
Yeah, I do want to ask a question, Dr. Powers, because I'm not sure if this is a sound approach, but I believe that neurofeedback is an effective tool that anybody in their Lyme healing journey can do and have benefits from after doing the therapeutic approach of reducing the toxins, the Lyme bacteria, the mold, et cetera, right? The food sensitivities. And even if you're feeling better, it's going to only help you feel even better, or potentially make you even more strong and resilient and not have a relapse or a setback, right? And I think that's kind of at the later stage of your healing journey. But I wonder for those who are in the earlier stages, where you say sometimes they don't have success, it still could be a potential beneficial treatment or tool, because people that are very, very sensitive to treatment are generally overstimulated with their nervous system, and they have extreme inflammation, and they can't tolerate any treatment. But will neurofeedback help modulate the immune system through managing the brain pathways, and therefore allow for treatment that otherwise would have been impossible because of sensitivities to that treatment? Does that make sense? I'm just not sure where it fits.
Makes perfect sense. I specialize with highly sensitive patients, so I do use it for that. And I'm trying to weigh out the cost benefit of it. So many of those people, by the time they get to me, they've really exhausted a lot of resources. And like I just talked to someone today who she called in for neurofeedback, and a lot of times I would more direct to naturopathy, but in her case, I was like, I really feel like neurofeedback is the place to start. So it is a case by case, and I 100% agree that if there's just a way of being, I don't have to know their whole history to know that their nervous system is really on overload. And so talking to them, if they've reacted to every supplement and nothing's ever worked, then I think neurofeedback is the place to start.
Will it also be beneficial in somebody who is just in constant fight or flight, constant freeze, constant anxiety, constant overwhelm? Is that another particular use case where you would introduce it earlier on if you weren't having an effective way to manage that? Or is that something that's not so much in your view?
Yes, I do. I mean, there's sometimes where I would get their history, and if they have extreme trauma, like as a naturopath, I'm not trained in the psychology of it, So if there's certain things that I think, wow, like that's way beyond, I might refer them out for some, either I'll do neurofeedback with them and they do EMDR brain spotting with that, or they'll go do the EMDR and brain spotting and come back to me. So it's, with everything, it all depends. But yes, to your point, yes, I think that's a great, that's how I do it. And it's true. And I'm just describing the outliers of when that might not be true. Of I might say, you know
Yep.
what, I think you need someone, like if they're really depressed, um, then I would have them do EMDR first. That depression is anxiety over time. The anxiety is used up the brain's resources, and it's just they're just going to need a little bit more care than what I can provide.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is because we are identifying this approach, right, the PARM, and I don't want people to think that it can only be used after the assist, which is the kill stage, which is I think where it's generally broadly accepted that it can be beneficial at the recovery and maintenance phase of a Lyme journey. But I think it could also be used at the prehab and assist side, right? Like the prehab getting your body stronger, and also the treatment side, if needed for extreme fight or flight or extreme sensitivities and inflammation too. So that's why I wanted to kind of clarify my comment to you earlier as far as where these things can fit in, if that makes sense.
Yes, I think there's a definitely application at the beginning. It's not a rigid thing. So there's times where it's the right and perfect thing to do first or in the middle, right? So they've
Yep.
tried a bunch of things, it's not working, we try it. Absolutely.
I just realized how far we've been into this interview. I can't believe it's been over 2 hours already. So I'm going to let Rich finish this up because we need to be respectful of your time. I can keep you for 16 hours, but that's not fair to you.
Yeah,
So I'm going to shut up and let Rich end this.
no,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I do have to take you in another area. And Matt is right. You've been really generous. But one of the things that we learned from Dr. Horowitz
Yeah.
is that a full 1/3 of his female patients had suffered sexual trauma at some point in their life before they became chronically ill for Lyme disease.
Yes.
And my thoughts when he shared that with us was that there were neural pathways that were developed as a result of the sexual trauma that made these patients more vulnerable to the illness on the, again, using our risk formula of threat versus vulnerability.
Mhm.
So I don't know whether you'd agree with me or not, but about whether or not that sexual trauma was creating a pathway that made them more vulnerable and therefore less capable of managing the disease or the bugs that resulted in the disease. And if that's the case, I'm just wondering whether or not perhaps that subset of people might benefit from the neural feedback earlier on so that you can change the neural pathways that are triggering the immune dysfunction and the inflammation and infection, whereas maybe other people who have because you said that the neural feedback is not working. The neurofeedback is not working with a certain subset of people who may be so neurologically toxic that that maybe that's not a group of people who are not coming with pre-existing trauma that was making them vulnerable. What are your thoughts about that?
100% agree. That it goes back to that trauma we get stuck in fight or flight, and then that suppresses that dysregulates the immune system and the nervous system. So that, like, if the sexual abuse happened in childhood, it would be called an adverse childhood event, or as an adult, it's still considered a trauma and creates PTSD, which would cause that dysregulation. So yeah, I 100% see that. And some with trauma, it's really hard to nobody wants to talk about it, nobody wants to relive it. um, Neurofeedback can help regulate their nervous system to a point. I personally feel like they still need to do some therapy, whether it's EMDR or brain spotting. But and what if for those who, I'm not an expert in those things, I refer out for those things. um, but it helps integrate the trauma, how it was described to me. And the reason why I learned all of this about trauma was because I had this subset of patients that I could not get off adrenal supplements. My goal is not to keep people on supplements. So they're well when they don't need that. And when I only see them once a week for once a month, for once a year for a tune up. And there's this group that every time we tried to stop, they would just crash. And so I started researching, and then I found Bruce Lipton's work he talked a lot about Psych K. And then that led me to this one provider who's like, well, I like Psych K, but now I'm into EMDR. And she taught me all about that. And the first thing that she said to me that I was just fascinated by, she said, you know, the first video I was showed was a bear in learning EMDR, was a bear that was being tracked. That bear was being videoed and chased with a helicopter. It thought it was, you know, was running for its life. And then they tranquilized it. They put a tracking device on it and they waited for it to wake up. And when it woke up, it shook and it shook it off. Well, that was the reset for the nervous system. But we don't do that. We don't know how to reset. We just get up and go to work the next day, or, you know, for children, they go to school the next day. So the EMDR and the brain spotting are the two that I'm aware of. I know there's more, but those help. You know, there is an element of having to talk about it, just, you know, not a lot, but enough to help integrate that trauma into the body, just like when that bear shook. It was a polar bear, is what she said. So I can do my part with helping calm the nervous system. And then at some point, I might refer out because there's a need for additional work. But what I do makes their work easier, better, faster, is what they've told me. So it's not a workaround for therapy always, but it certainly makes the therapy easier to do. Like when your nervous system isn't so amped up, having to maybe talk about it once or twice doesn't take you out. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, look, like every one of your answers, it was brilliant. I mean, I do appreciate it. And like Matt, I do want to be polite to you and your family, and give you back to them, because I have another 2 hours of questions I'll have to ask you, but we'll have to do that at another
Have to do it
time.
again.
So
Yeah.
can you share with our listeners how they can get in touch with you and the Longevity Health Center?
Yes. So I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. And there's sometimes where it's compartmentalized in my brain, and your interview style and your engagement and how you listen and your presence are really extraordinary. So thank you. How you're being has enabled me to be how I'm being. So thank you for
Well,
that.
thank you. That's very, very kind of you to say.
Thank you. And then to reach me, I work at Longevity Health Center in Roswell, Georgia. And as we said, the Amen Clinic, but I do all of my services at Longevity. You can call me there. And the number is 770-642-4646. And my name is Anna Powers. And you know, I'm happy to have a conversation most of the time. We do have a new patient coordinator who you can talk to, but if you have questions about neurofeedback or the energy healing, they most likely will refer you to me anyway, to have a quick conversation to see if I feel like I can help you. And part of my success is I only work with people I think I can help. And if I don't think I can help you, I do everything in my power to find someone who can. Now, if it's out of state, I don't have as many resources there, but just like I mentioned, the dental organization, there's certain organizations that we can do. That I believe with all my heart, I was put on this earth to do what I'm doing. And it's a privilege. It would be a privilege to try to help anyone along their path, however I can, whether it's with me or finding someone else.